Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. If I could get your attention, thank you. And if we get seated, I'd like to begin the presentation, the events today. So first of all, I want to thank everyone for attending. This is the fourth day of the inaugural Death Penalty Abolition Week. It has been a resounding success up to this point. We've been blessed to have three remarkable and impactful speakers, beginning on Monday with Yusuf Salam, who is one of the Central Park Five. As a young teenager, 16 years of age, he was wrongfully incarcerated and convicted for the brutal rape of a jogger in Central Park and was ultimately exonerated. I think his case highlighted a couple of problems with the criminal justice system, including racism and the problem that is the focus, the mission of the Exoneration Justice Clinic, and that is overturning wrongful convictions, and he was a victim of such a wrongful conviction. The next day, on Tuesday, we had the privilege of hearing from Lamont Hunter. Lamont Hunter is an exoneree who spent, I think, upwards of 13 years on death row. He was wrongfully convicted of capital murder, was sentenced to death. The victim in the case was a 3-year-old child, a son that he had assumed responsibility for, was the son of his girlfriend, and he was charged and convicted with not only murder of the child but rape of the 3-year-old child, and his convictions were ultimately overturned. He was vacated, and he was released from prison, but again served on death row for over a decade. He was represented by one of our own, Aaron Barnhart, a 2005 Notre Dame Law School graduate. And if you were here on Tuesday to hear her presentation, she exemplifies, she personifies what Notre Dame Law School is about when we talk about promoting, educating a different kind of lawyer. She exemplifies that and has in her career over the last 20 years. So we were very pleased to welcome her back to Notre Dame and hear about the great work that she's doing on behalf of innocent people. And then yesterday, we had the distinct pleasure of hearing from Sil Schieber. And Sil shared his very personal story involving the death and brutal rape murder of their daughter, his daughter, Vicky's daughter, Shannon. And he talked about his opposition to the death penalty, and he spoke about his opposition from a religious, faith-based perspective. And his was a story of faith, of deeply ingrained faith in action, and moral courage. And but with that, we've saved the best for last, and you're going to hear in a few moments from Sister Helen Prejean. But before that, I want to introduce our dean, Marcus Cole. He is the Joseph A. Mattson Dean and Professor of Law at Notre Dame Law School. He's the 11th Dean in the history of Notre Dame Law School. He's a leading scholar of the empirical law and economics of commerce and finance. He was a former faculty member at Stanford Law School until he came from 1997 until he came to Notre Dame in 2019. He held 2 endowed chairs. He's taught courses in bankruptcy, banking, contracts, and venture capital. But what's most impressive of Dean Cole has been his support for the Exoneration Justice Clinic from day one. We are so blessed to have such strong support and leadership from Dean Cole. We would not be here today. The Exoneration Justice would not be here today. This event would not have happened today, but for the work and support of Dean Cole. And so, with that, I want to welcome Dean Cole. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Garuli. It is my honor to be here today. My name is Marcus Cole. I'm the Dean of Notre Dame Law School, and I'm here to welcome you to the fourth day of our week dedicated to the abolition of the death penalty. As I said in my remarks yesterday, if you were here, If you've ever spent any time in a Catholic school, elementary school, middle school, high school, college, or a law school like this, you have been face to face with the brutality and violence of the death penalty, because that crucifix on the wall is exactly what that represents. Our Lord Jesus Christ was a victim of the death penalty. And if you're unfamiliar with the pain and brutality of the death penalty, all you need to do is look at the blood streaming from his hands, his feet, his side, and his head. In 2018, when Pope Francis changed the Catechism of the Catholic Church, Catechism number 2267, he made it explicit that we as Catholics must oppose the death penalty, that it is unacceptable in any society, whether you're Catholic or not. If you're a Christian, you must oppose the death penalty. And we should not rest until we and all Catholics are as opposed to the death penalty as we have demonstrated our opposition to abortion. Every human life is created in the likeness and image of God and has to be treated that way. And so I'm honored and delighted to welcome back Sister Helen. The last time I was here with her, I did a fireside chat with her, and all I remember about that was her telling us that we needed to persuade the people who go squirrel hunting that we need to abolish the death penalty. I'm not sure what the connection is between squirrel hunting and the death penalty, but she has been a tireless fighter against the death penalty and for the dignity of every human life. And I'm so grateful that she spends her life and her energy doing God's work, protecting human life wherever it is. And I'm so grateful that she's returned here to Notre Dame, which I consider her second home. So I think I need to introduce my colleague, Jen Mason McAward, who will do a formal introduction and welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, sweetie, good to see you.
Hi, I'm Jen Mason McAward. I'm privileged to be a professor here at the law school, and I also direct the university's Clow Institute for Civil and Human Rights. It is my great privilege to introduce to you Sister Helen Prejean. She's a sister of St. Joseph from Louisiana, and she spent the early part of her career as an educator and as an administrator in her order. But there came a point where she decided to move into a local community so that she could live and work with the poor around her. And during that time, she started corresponding with a man who was on death row, and she ultimately accompanied him as he was executed. From that experience, she wrote the first of her 3 books. This one was called Dead Man Walking. It has since become not only a best-selling book, but it's been turned into a movie, an Oscar award-winning movie, an opera, I think soon to be a graphic novel. And since that time, she has spent her life talking to people and educating people and advocating against the death penalty. She has advised popes. She has worked with people on death row and the families of murder victims. And she has spent her time educating communities and students around the moral issues that accompany the death penalty in every way. And so in my view, I've had the opportunity to meet her several times, and I think that we are in the midst of a prophet and a living saint, and we are so blessed to have her here and to learn from her. And so if you can please join me in welcoming and thanking Sister Helen Prejean.
Thank you. You did good. Every minute that we have here. I want to talk to you about fire. I want to talk to you about catching on fire. How many scripture references are there to fire? We just had recent readings and Lenten readings of Moses and Midian working out with the flocks for his father-in-law and sees a bush burning. Have you ever had an experience where either words you're meditating on in the scriptures or some fact you just got about what our society is doing, where your heart burst into flames? I'm talking about passion. I'm talking about catching onto the wave of a worthy purpose that might take us for the rest of our life, but it's worth it. And let me tell you what happened to me. All while Tim Robbins was writing the script of the movie Dead Man Walking, he kept saying, and it was true, the nun is in over her head. I was. What do I know about the criminal justice system? Okay, I taught 7th and 8th graders, taught high school, taught religion, worked in a parish. And then this way that you got to watch out for sneaky Jesus. I'm warning you, warning you. So you kind of, you hear, and there's a part of us, we're built to be great people, to work for the causes that are way beyond us, but we have God's Spirit in us. And what happened to me was Sister St. Joseph teaching, here comes all this talk. It came out of Latin America. We need to be involved in social justice, need to be. And I went, look, we nuns, we're not social workers. We tell about the gospel and it's up to the people to go do the work, whatever. And then I went to a conference, and you never know where Jesus is going to zap you. I mean, nuns always go to conferences, all right? And we had this sister talking to us, Marie Augusta Neal, a sister of Notre Dame de Namur, who taught at Boston College. For 40 years, she taught the gospel of Jesus and social teachings, sociology. And she talked to us. See, and I was stuck on something. I was stuck. Jesus had said, the poor you always have with you. I mean, let's face it, poverty's always been. They got some people who are poor. People who go to Notre Dame generally aren't poor, with some exceptions. But so I was stuck there, and I just didn't see where it was in the gospel that we needed to be working for social justice. And I go to this conference. First day I came through unscathed, got through it. The next day, Sister Marie, because she took us into the world the way the wealth was uneven, and I knew life had always been unfair. And she said, and now she was going to talk about Jesus the next day. I said, bring on King Jesus. I'm ready for Jesus. Let's have some Jesus talk. And here was the line that when I heard it, it changed the spiritual trajectory of my life. She said, Jesus preached good news to the poor. I knew that. And what I thought was coming next was, and one day their reward would be great in heaven. They would have a high place at the eternal banquet sitting right next to Jesus. And she said, integral to the dignity of poor people is that they have a right to struggle against poverty. That poverty in God's will. Some of you will be poor, you'll suffer more, but you'll have a great reward later. Some of you will do fine, you'll go to good universities, you'll have a good life. That ain't God. That's us. The systems we set up. And for the first time, I got the connection, the gospel, and what's going on. And I realized I don't even know any poor people. And I made a move. The thing is that when we wake up, it's not how late we wake up. It's what we do when we hear something and we wake up. And we move, and I moved into the inner city of St. Thomas housing projects and worked at a place called Hope House, where for the first time as a white, privileged woman, I had neighbors who were poor and African Americans struggling against welfare, jobs, health care. People were dying because they didn't have health care. And I saw their suffering. I was with them. They were my neighbors. There's a saying from Latin America, what the eye doesn't see, the heart can't feel. With Brian Stevenson, he always uses the word proximity. Proximity. Who do you have proximity to? Who are you talking to? Who do you know? So working at Hope House, I'm in the soil then. My heart's awakening to justice. I'm reading the life of Martin Luther King. I'm writing in my journal. I'm tuned. I'm ready. And it was while I was there that one day on St. Andrew Street, coming out of the Adult Learning Center, somebody from the Louisiana Coalition of Jails and Prisons met me, had a little clipboard, had a little project going on, bumps into me. Hey, Sister Helen, you want to write to somebody on death row here in Louisiana? And I went, oh yeah, I could write some letters. I was an English major, write some letters. This poor wretch on death row, don't know much at all about the criminal justice system, but I wrote the man a letter. That's what I'm talking about, sneaky Jesus, see? Because I thought I was only going to be writing letters. So I wrote him, Pat Sonia. You know what the problem was? He wrote back. And there was a connection, a personal connection. Pope Francis talks about this all the time. The gospel of encounter. Who do we encounter? So here's this man, we're writing back and forth. He doesn't have anybody to come visit him. And it kind of all sprang out of that. I'm meditating on the gospel. How many times had I read those words in the scripture? I was hungry, you gave me to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me to drink. When I taught 7th and 8th grade, we did skits on this. All the things of. And there were the words, I was in prison and you came to me. And I wrote him a simple little letter. I just said, Pat, I'll come see you sometime. Wow. Return mail. It was so exciting to him to have a visitor. His poor mama had mental struggles of all kind, and here was her son on death row. She was getting a lot of abuse in this little Cajun town of St. Martinville. She couldn't go to the grocery store without hearing people say, her sons were those evil murderers of those 2 teenage kids. And it had been a terrible murder. All murders are terrible, okay? And so he had no one. So in the return mail, he had a visitor form. And he said, you got to fill it out. You have to put your identity. Are you a wife? Are you an ex-wife? They really want to know that because they don't want any fights going on in the prison. And then one of the categories was spiritual advisor. So I wrote down spiritual advisor. And little did I know that it would be over 2 years from then. The only one who could be with him in the last hours when he was put in the holding cell there in the death house and actually accompany him to execution is going to be the spiritual advisor. Who's going to be me? We hadn't had an execution in Louisiana in 20 years. This is in the early 80s. Supreme Court had put it back in 76. Did I notice that the Supreme Court had put back the death penalty? Not in my realm, no proximity there. And then Louisiana was heating up. We're back there now. The ex-slave states, look at the states doing the executing. Ex-slave states, 10 of them are all back to executions. We just killed somebody in Louisiana the other night, Jesse Hoffman, with nitrogen gas. We had got a gung-ho governor all set to empty death row, and always with the claim, we're doing this for the victim's family. This is justice for the victim's family. And Dean Cole talked about bankruptcy. Well, moral bankruptcy. I want to talk about moral bankruptcy. Think what it means for a minute. That what the state promises you, that you're going to need to wait, and the average waiting time from a death sentence given to an execution is 17 years. So your grief is public. The media is at your door every time there's a change in the status of the case. And then you get the summons. And you get to sit on the front row and watch as the state, and Indiana is souping this up, get ready to do it. As the state kills the one in front of your eyes that had killed your loved one, you watch that killing, and it's all legal. This is where the law comes in. We make it legal, which means then we make it right, morally right if it's the law. And you can't trust anything simply because it's the law. Slavery was the law. You couldn't teach a slave to swim. You couldn't teach a slave to read. Just because it's in the law doesn't mean it's in the gospel. And I witnessed Pat Sonier's execution. I was there with him in the 4 days as he was in a holding cell waiting to go. And here's why the death penalty is always going to be torture. What's the definition of torture? What's in the Convention Against Torture? The definition is an extreme mental or physical assault on someone who's been rendered defenseless. It's the defenseless part of it that makes it the torture. And it was the heart of my conversation or dialogue with Pope John Paul. I said, in your encyclical, you upheld the inviolable dignity of human life. Where is there dignity in taking a person who is alive and strapping him down and deliberately killing him? And the mental torture comes from, we are imaginative creatures, we are conscious beings, we anticipate what's going to happen to us. And the people I have known and accompanied to execution, 8 of them now, all anticipated dying, lived through the dying. Will my legs hold me up? Lived through the anticipation, lived through the fear, lived through the terror of awaiting the time those guards are going to come in your cell and drag you out and take you out to be killed. And watching as other people that you've come to know are taken out to be killed. So what's our basic moral journey here? And this is what I did in the book when I wrote Dead Man Walking. And it helped that I was in over my head because I wasn't an expert. I think some people read the book, well, this one doesn't know what she's doing. Let's see what happens to her. I mean, if I was an expert and I wrote a book on the death penalty, and they already had books out there on the death penalty, you can start fighting an expert on page 1. Oh, yeah? Oh, yeah? And you start fighting. Well, the nun doesn't know what she's doing. Let's see what happens to her. It helped. It helped. And I came out of that execution chamber after watching Pat be killed. It was in the middle of the night. It was dark. The sisters were waiting for me and these good lawyers who had worked on the case. And the first thing I did was throw up. I had never in my life watched such a ritualized legal act, and everybody was just doing their job. And that's when the mission to you, to everyone that I've gone to talk to, because I'm a witness. And when you're a witness, Elie Wiesel wrote this about the Holocaust. When you're a witness, you have a special moral responsibility to share what you know with your fellow citizens. And that's what brings me here to you. From that parking lot outside Louisiana State Penitentiary on that dark night, early in the morning hours of April 5th, 1984, I began. I didn't know what steps are we going to take. Everybody in their cat believed in the death penalty. I mean, when the Dead Man Walking came out in 93, 80% of the American public said they supported the death penalty. So you begin. We did a long march from New Orleans to Baton Rouge to start calling attention to the death penalty in Louisiana. People along the road would stop. What y'all marching for? Against the death penalty. And we got a lot of fingers. We got a lot of, the middle finger. We got a lot of, oh, man, let's fry the bastards, fry the bastard. And that's how you begin. Some call it the prophetic rule. You don't think of it, you just as a prophetic thing necessarily. But you know what you got to do? It's burning in your heart. Jeremiah talked about his bones burning. There's a burning. I got to do this. But it's graced with God's Spirit. There's a gentleness in it too. That we're not going to get anywhere by just arguing people or calling them bad names. You call yourself a Christian. You believe in the death penalty. You know what happened to Jesus on the cross. I've seen the crucifix and the crucifixion of Jesus used in the arguments. Well, the good thief was next to him, next to Jesus. He had done something wrong. So look, they pay for their sins. They go through the death penalty, and that wins them salvation. That a violent death at the hands of the state is the way you get to salvation, because look at what you did. We cannot ever identify a human being with the worst act of our lives. We can't. Imagine if somebody who happens to know the mean things you did to your grandmother, and here you are going to law school, whatever, we know what you did to your grandmother. That is who you are. That is your essence. And there's a part of us that knows we can grow, that we can change. Oh, no, but look what I'm doing now. Look what I'm doing now. And think of the arrogance in the death penalty, where we are saying to a human being, we are going to decide God's finished with you, Sometimes they're called natural-born killers. Sometimes in the rhetoric of prosecutors in Louisiana when they're running for office, they brag about how many death penalties they got because it's part of the political zeitgeist of things. You're tough on crime. I mean, just look at nationally what's going on now. Violence, you're tough. I mean, I think Trump said something like, let's shoot people who are shoplifting, shoot them as they come out of the store. Smash that reporter in the face. Violence. And that's not Jesus. And the Spirit of God in our hearts also gives us, a lot of people say, how do you keep doing this? Where do you get your energy from? When the Spirit of God takes a hold of us, and you can read the prophets and see this, but it happens to us too. There's a gentleness. Jesus' gospel is always by persuasion. It is never by arguing somebody down or calling them names. It's like, look, let me tell you this experience I have had. And like the experience of Pat Saunier, he and his brother had been involved in killing an innocent teenage couple that they had kidnapped, abducted, and shot in the back of the head. It was the most cold-blooded, terrible killing. And I didn't know what to do with the victim's family in the beginning, and I stayed away from them. And it was a mistake. But I learned from my mistake. And I had a really good editor when I wrote Dead Man Walking. He helped me with two big things that you never would have heard about the book, I'm sure. And one of them was, he said, you wait far too long in the narrative. Now, you're a good writer. You're a gritty writer. You're putting in all the detail. But you're starting with the human rights of the one to be executed, and you're putting all your attention in that. And your reader's not going to stay with you. It's not going to help you that you're a nun, because they're going to say, oh, believes in Jesus, forgives people. If you don't talk about the crime and what happened to those teenage kids in that sugarcane field that night of November 4th, 1977, and express your own outrage at the killing of those young innocent lives, no reader is going to follow you in this book, because they're not going to think you can go over to the other side, that you can really be there with them. So that was the first change I made, redrafted the book, and we got to start with the suffering of the victims. Then he said, your job is to walk this tight wire and then gradually bring them with you into the execution chamber so that when Pat is fed his last meal, when the guards go in to shave his head because it was electrocution so his hair didn't catch on fire, and put a diaper on him before they let him into the place where they sat him in the chair, and you take the people with you in that they can see this is a human being. He did a terrible, terrible crime, but he is a human being, and you take them with you. That was the first thing. Then the second thing is I kind of downplayed the thing of not reaching out to the victim's family. One of the parents of the girl were really angry. They having their own press conferences saying, we can't wait to see this SOB fry. The father's saying, I wish I could pull the switch. And I don't blame them. They're in trauma and they're in grief. This violent, their child was alive, goes to a homecoming football game on a Friday night and is never seen alive again. It's not just grief, but it's trauma. And so they are expressing that out into the media or wherever. But it made, and Jason Epstein, who was working with me, and so I kind of just said, they were already in such pain. I didn't want to give them further pain by having somebody come who's a spiritual advisor to the people who kill their kids. And he said, well, Helen, you're kind of letting yourself off a little easy there, aren't you? And he looks me right in the eye. It was cowardice, wasn't it? You were scared, weren't you? I go, yeah. He said, write that in a book. Be honest with your readers. Because then they see, look, you're a human being, you make mistakes. Then they'll trust you to follow you. Don't try to cover it over. Those were the two big things. And so that went into that book, Dead Man Walking, which came out in 1993, as I mentioned. Everybody was for the death penalty mostly, because we hadn't had the real dialogue to get deeper into the moral issues of who we are as a people, see? Because the death penalty is about us. It's about how we choose to respond when people do terrible crimes. The rhetoric we hear the prosecutors use, this is a monster, this is an animal. If you ever go to a death penalty trial and hear the language, and I found this out, one thing a prosecutor can never say, no matter how terrible that crime was, can never call the person evil. They call the act evil. They have other words, of course, monster, animal, you can't let this animal live among us. But there's a judgment call in there that's it for this person. I've even heard prosecutors say things like, we can't even trust to put them in prison. They're natural born killers. They'll kill other inmates or they'll kill guards. We got to kill them. That's what they deserve. And it seems like equal justice. Look, they killed, we kill. Until you come to the gospel of Jesus, till you come to the presence of people like Gandhi, till you come into the presence of people like Martin Luther King, till you come into the presence of people who knows that as human beings we are flawed and ignorant, and we have biases in the way we construct laws. Look how long the laws lasted that black people couldn't buy homes in white neighborhoods. You ever read this book, The Color of Law? In the United States, the legacy of slavery is with us in so many ways. And one way it's really evident in the death penalty is, overwhelmingly, it's when white people are killed that the death penalty sought. And I can say from New Orleans, 50% of the homicide victims are people of color. And the DAs seldom go for the death penalty for a person of color. Because you got to value human life equally. You value the life of this young black kid that was shot as much as that suburban housewife who was killed in her house. And we got to look at that. We're human beings. We got to enter into our humanness and realize, now, how are we going to construct a system of being able to decide who should die? And you look at the Gregg decision of the Supreme Court of the United States that put the death penalty back in 1976. And two big things about that decision. One, they set a criteria. Now look, we don't want to be given the death penalty for ordinary murder. Only the worst of the worst. Do you know the difference between an ordinary murder? Well, my mother was killed. No, ordinary wasn't during a felony. When we construct law, and that was the first thing that was askew from the beginning, it's fuzzy, people don't know what it means, and then it's coupled with discretionary power of DAs to go for death or not. If you ever see a death penalty like Bob Macy in Oklahoma, Cowboy Bob Macy, 54 death penalties. It was on his agenda. He cut notches on his belt when he got a death penalty. And you're leaving that discretionary power up to these prosecutors and also to people like our Southern governor, Jeff Landry, who's decided it's going to be on his agenda to clear off death row in Louisiana. We haven't had an execution in 22 years. And he's put it on his agenda to do, of using that discretionary power to decide for death. That's why it's always going to be arbitrary and capricious. We're leaving too much up to the discretion of people to carry it out or not. There will never be a death penalty unless a prosecuting attorney decides to go for death. They always have the option to do a plea bargain and have the person get a life sentence. They always have that. But, we're always, among other people, there's pressures on us. There's a culture in DA's offices, like the prosecutor in Philadelphia, who began to stand up and say, no, I will never seek the death penalty. We had Jason Williams in New Orleans, who ran for DA saying, I will not seek the death penalty. Look at that human discretion that's always in there. Here's the hope. And here's what I've discovered. I've been crisscrossing this nation talking to people, and guess what I found out? Most people are not wedded to the death penalty. They feel it deeply. They thought about it and made a decision. Most people have never reflected on the death penalty. We go to Thurgood Marshall, the first African American on the Supreme Court. And I have followed this from that parking lot outside that execution center in Louisiana. He said, a lot of Americans say they support the death penalty. Bring them close to it. Educate them, and they will not be for the death penalty. I have found that to be true. Because most people are good and decent people. Jurors are good and decent people. And look what we're laying on them. Now, we want you to make a decision whether your fellow citizen lives or dies. It's in your hands. I met a guy one time, he had been on a jury, and he knew Robert Sawyer, one of the people we executed. He knew he was off. He knew the man was mentally challenged. And he knew that from the beginning. So he said, well, look, I'll just go in for the jury. It's going to be like a democratic process. You know, we'll all just say what we think. So the foreman said, let's get a leaning here and see what we got. So death, 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 death. And it comes to him. He said, hey, let's let the guy live. I mean, as long as we say from him, maybe he can change. And he said, they came down on me. I'm going to use a nice expression, beans on rice. But he said something else. And he said, they all came down on me. And I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to do it, but I caved in. So everybody else was voting. So I voted for death too. And on the night Robert Sawyer was executed, this juror called Nick, his attorney. He's drunk and he's crying. And he said, I tell my son, always stand up for what you believe, no matter what kind of pressure you're under. So look what we put the juries through. Look what we put ourselves through. Moral bankruptcy. Can it really heal a victim's family to watch the state kill the one who killed their loved one? Is this really justice? And what are the words of Jesus? What does Jesus teach us? You've heard it said, an eye for an eye. But I say to you, and I'll close with this story of the real hero in the book of Dead Man Walking, is Lloyd LeBlanc, the father of David LeBlanc. And David was killed that night by the Saunier brothers in that sugarcane field. And Lloyd loved his son. They were close. They were both really good mechanically inclined. They used to work on cars together there. And so David goes off to this homecoming football game in Thibodaux, Louisiana that night, and he doesn't come home. And these two good Catholic parents pacing the floor, saying the rosary, please God, may our son be safe. And in the morning, there was a sheriff's deputy at the door. Lloyd, I think you better come with us. I think it's your son. We have him in the morgue. We need you to identify his body. And here goes Lloyd LeBlanc, pull his son's body out. And he said, I looked down at my son. He said, all I knew was the Our Father just flowed out of me. He said the prayer, Our Father who art in heaven. And he came to the words in Our Father, and they flowed out too, but he didn't feel them. And forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those. He didn't feel those words at all. And he was consumed with anger. Because not only that David had been killed, but Ewell, his wife, they had to move David's grave. They had to move it close to the house because she can't make it through a day without visiting a boy's grave. That he could see what happened to her. He could see what happened to his daughter, Vicky. That their brother had been killed. It's tremendous, unbelievable grief and trauma. And he was angry. So he and I gradually, when I reached out, and he prayed in this little chapel. Every Friday morning, I said, I'll come pray with you, Mr. LeBlanc. This is a Catholic thing, right? Keeping vigil before the Blessed Sacrament all night. I said, what time do you go to pray? He says, 4 to 5, Friday morning. This is over in St. Martinville, Louisiana. Means getting in a car, spending the night in Baton Rouge, means whatever it means. And to be kneeling next to this man, praying on Friday the sorrowful mysteries of the rosary, the agony of Jesus, the agony of his son out there in his last hours being abducted, the scourging at the pillar, the nailing to the cross, the agony. And I'm kneeling next to a living Father who's living that mystery of the death of his son. And gradually, as we would talk, as we come out, then we started adding breakfast on to the prayer. And he said to me, he said, I've always been a kind person. I mean, if I'm good with my hands, if I see somebody broken down on the side of the road at 2 a.m, I'm going to stop and I'm going to help them because it's who I am. And I was losing it. I was angry all the time. I'm making Yola cry. I'm missing out on my daughter Vicky's life. I'm not attending to her. And he came to this moment of grace. And he just said, and the way he explained it to me was he put his hand out like that. Then I said, they killed my son, but I'm not going to let them kill me. And then the kindness flowed back into his soul. He said, people think forgiveness is weak. Like you condoning what? Oh, you kill my son. Well, it's okay. It's just my son. No, you're not condoning anything. But if you ever look at the word forgive, to give before, means not to let the love and integrity in our hearts get so compromised that we get consumed with the anger and we lose our own life. One victim's family put it to me, it's like I was drinking poison and I hope it killed him. You cannot sustain a life filled with anger. And so when the state legalizes this vengeance, he killed, we're going to kill him. And that complicates it further. And it's not morally trustworthy to go that way. And this man made his way out of it. And Pat and Eddie's mama, who lived in St. Martinville, she couldn't go in a grocery store. People would say, there she is, that white trash woman. Her son's killed the Bourke and the LeBlanc children. And people were throwing dead animals on her front porch. And teenagers were circling the house going, mother of the murderer, mother of the murderer. You can't write hate into your law and say, but look, now don't treat the mother mean. Be nice to the family. It's like dropping red dye into the water and it's going to spread into the society. So the way of Lloyd LeBlanc then was Mrs. Sonia hears her doorbell one day. She opened the blind. She was living like a little hermit and sees a man on her front porch. And she goes to the door. He has a basket of fruit. It's Lloyd LeBlanc, the father of David. And he said, Miss Sonia, I hear you're having a tough time in this town. Look, I'm a parent. You're a parent. We never really know what our kids might do, and I don't hold you responsible for what your sons did. And here's my number. You call me if you need me. And we have sitting here, I don't know if you'll get to hear them or not, but Vicky and Syl, whose daughter Shannon was murdered. What have they done with that grief? And it was all the policeman's fault because they were negligent and there was a serial rapist going around and they didn't do anything. Take that grief, take that sorrow, take that loss, and Shannon's name has been said across this country, and it is redemptive because they are living testimony that you don't have to go the way of, they killed and we're going to kill them. So this is worth thinking about, and you couldn't be in a better place to do it. Right here at Notre Dame, a lot of you in the law school or whatever you're in, but to be able to look and see, how is it that over 1,500 years of dialogue, the Catholic Church on 2018, as Dean Cole said, Pope Francis officially changed the words that under no circumstances, no matter how grievous the crime, can we ever entrust over to the human agents of government a godlike quality. God gives life. God takes life. And where the crunch point for us as Catholics often has been is, yeah, we're for this dignity of life from womb to tomb. But we make a big distinction when it comes to people that have done murder. Oh, but not for them. But not for them. Yeah, strap them down. Yeah, kill them. And that is the spiritual crunch and the challenge that God and the Spirit of God stirring in our own hearts gives to us today. And Indiana's gearing up to kill again. And you are members of this state, even if you're students here. And what are you going to do about that? You're in a great place to figure it out and to follow your hearts and your conscience. And I applaud you for that. Glad to be part of this with Professor Gurule, who set a lot of this in motion, and the dean. When you see that kind of leadership happening, you can see consciousness changing and conscience and the beauty of our Catholic faith lived out for all life, pro-life, not just the innocent, but the guilty as well. Thank you.
Okay, amazing. You wanna answer a few questions? You wanna sit there and ask? Thank you. Go ahead. Good. No. Up to you.
What y'all want to do?
I'm happy to have you take the lead here. No, sir.
So, Sister Helen, thank you so much for that very powerful message. You want to have a seat
Sure.
and answer a few questions for
Sure, y'all. Look, I want to hear what your questions.
our audience. I have a tough question for you.
Am I on?
Sure, there's.
Oh, it was on. Let's see.
Oh, it is on. It's on, yeah.
Can you hear me now?
All right, so I have a tough question for you. You talk about the discretion of prosecutors, and that they exercise that executive power to ask for the death penalty. I'm a law and economics person, and so in my work, I think a lot about incentives. And so, what would you say in response to the argument that I've heard some people make that prosecutors can't really get someone who's committed murder to plead guilty to a life sentence unless they have that backdrop of the possibility of the death penalty behind
Well,
it?
they use it as a bargaining chip to
Right.
get confession.
Right, that's, yeah,
That's big.
yeah. So what about that argument that you have to have a death penalty in order to get them to either get a confession or to get a plea bargain?
That is operative. That is used all the time. Take the case of Richard Glossop in Oklahoma. Maybe y'all have heard it about this case. Miracle of a case. 30 years. Finally, the Supreme Court took the case. The one man who testified against Richard Glossop was this guy, Justin Sneed, who was a meth addict. And they finally got the video of him there with the detectives questioning him. He had confessed to murdering the manager of a motel, confessed to it, killed him with a baseball bat. But that was going to be hard to get a death penalty. And this is Cowboy Bob Macy, who got those 54 death penalties. Then we see the detectives introducing into it, talking to him. Of course, he's scared. Of course, what's going to happen to him? And then they say to him, Justin, Richard Glossop's trying to put this totally on you. We think he was the mastermind behind this. Isn't that true that Richard Glossop was a mastermind behind this? And we'll take the death penalty off of you. But isn't that true? And Justin Sneed said, yeah. And it's all on a videotape that finally they saw these detectives that did this with him. He's scared. They say, you going to get the death penalty? Oh, no, let's put it on Richard Glossop. It's a bargaining chip they use to get confessions. And that is wrong. And we don't know what goes on behind those walls when it's the detectives in there, the police in there with people questioning them. That's my response to that, Dan.
Yeah, well, let's push that a little bit, though. If we take away the death penalty as an option or alternative for prosecutors, how do you expect those negotiations to go then?
First of all, it's off the table that the government could kill people. So you're going to do what they've been doing in Europe for years. If you look at any of the crime shows that come on BBC, the interrogation, you want to try to get a confession. But it is never to hold death as the bargaining chip because they don't have it. So what is the punishment? I mean, if you have any sense of what life is like in prison, you never touch a doorknob again. You have lost your freedom. You are thrown in among people. I mean, look at what a life sentence is. And we're going to have to look at the morality, and Pope Francis has spoken about this. Without the possibility of parole, what it means that no matter how much you change, you're always, so there are two ways of getting death. One is by execution and others death in prison with a life sentence. But it simply is never on the table. And when you're talking to people, maybe they confess, maybe they don't. But it's not in your prerogative to be able to hold death over.
So you mentioned Brian Stevenson, and he talks a lot about proximity, and that it's difficult to develop empathy for a person until you put yourself close to their circumstances and their situation. You did that with your life, moving into a neighborhood where you were in proximity with people. I want to ask you about proximity with respect to the death penalty. In legal history in the Middle Ages, and even in relatively recent legal history, the death penalty was a public event, that the public was invited to see hangings, the public was invited to see executions. Today, we have executions take place behind closed doors in the dark of night, in the middle of night, and for the most part, the public is mostly unaware of them even taking place. Right. Unless there is a big, high-profile, last-minute appeal to the Supreme Court or someplace, the public isn't even aware that how many people are on death row or what an execution looks like. What are your thoughts about making the death penalty more public as a mechanism of proximity?
It's hugely important. And again, that's that expression from Latin America, what the eye doesn't see, the heart can't feel. And I noticed this immediately after the execution of Pat Saunier. So people were seeing on the news, oh, look at the crime he did. Oh, he was executed, justice was done. They don't see the suffering. They don't see the human being. And that was a good thing about the movie of Dead Man Walking, because it's visual. The good thing about the opera of Dead Man Walking, it's live drama. And you see the murder in the prologue. Terrence McNally was the librettist for the opera. You see it, and you see the suffering of the family. And then you see the killing. What about the guards who have to do the killing? You know what's interesting, Dean, is we haven't had an execution in 22 years. The culture on death row has changed. We have a reform warden who opens the cells every morning at 7, and death row inmates can participate in sports and as long as they don't act out. And what we need to do is just assure that society can be safe, and that's it. We're not going to deal with the death thing anymore. And that thing of the semi-secret, now they even, in the Louisiana executions, the Attorney General said not even the lawyer for Jesse Hoffman, who was killed with nitrogen gas, could be with the witnesses. There was nobody there to be there on Jesse's side, and they determine all that. It's just a few witnesses that see it. Then people are distanced from it, then they read it. And you know what I've discovered? That definitely people are good and decent, and they can go there. And that is what the spiritual life is about, is to take the surface of life, but then to go deeply into it. And so that's why people like me, who have been witnesses, people like Brian Stevenson, who have been in there and know how it works, the importance of our witness and the importance of you, once your consciousness is changed,
that you become an active voice. It's a pretty simple thing to call the governor's office. Have you ever acted in any of these issues? It's not complicated. And that's what we got to do. So we got to keep bringing people close. I'm glad about the graphic, Dead Man Walking. That's going to come out. It's going to be published November 5th. And I'm hoping to bring it here to Notre Dame and launch it. Have one of the launchings here, the graphic Dead Man Walking, because this is going to be to reach out to young people across the country. And they're the ones who have to be thinking about human rights. And so that's our job.
So you're talking about bringing the death penalty to young people, but you also mentioned that the average time on death row is 17 years
Before execution.
before execution. And that means that in a lot of circumstances, you've got young people who weren't even born when the crime was committed,
Right.
who are then voting for prosecutors, or that the crime is now out of the memory of the public by the time the execution happens. What is your solution for bringing the original crime to the fore for the public when the public may have completely forgotten about what's happened?
Definitely that happens. But what education's about is right moral thinking. So young people can have this discussion. Do you think we ought to give the power over to the state to kill? What does it involve? What does it mean that when you give, it's the only example where the criminal activity of the perpetrator is imitated by the state in saying they're seeking justice. We imitate it. They kill and we kill them. Where else? So young people can learn that. So what to do with that problem of the distance between that, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that exactly. I know this, though, in Louisiana, 84% of the death sentences given at those local trials and at the state level were overturned in final resolution. So you got a lot of, emotion going, like in Richard's case. What became clear that made it up to the Supreme Court, very unusual, you had the Attorney General of the blooming state also filing with the defense saying, we made an error in this case. It's hard to get prosecutors sometimes to admit mistakes. And the Attorney General was involved in it. And you know what it all boiled down to? When Justin Sneed was on the witness stand, the prosecutor was talking to him, and the prosecutor knew he was lying about something. In law, it's called NAPU or NAPU. That he was not bipolar, he had never had psychiatric help, and she knew he was lying when he said it, and that's the lie. And when Sotomayor wrote the decision, the prosecutor knew he was lying, and prosecutors have an obligation to correct any false information that's coming out of some witness. And on that basis, they have remanded it back. It's very unusual for that to happen. Almost always the Supreme Court upholds these cases and never even looks at them. Or in the case of Jesse, look at this. We had 4 people in his case that granted cert. So saying there's a constitutional violation in there, it's worth a hearing to look at, but 5 of them wouldn't vote for him to live. So they granted cert, but he didn't get the 5th vote, and so he was killed. Because this is human beings doing human things. And look at the vagaries that happen in it. Look at all the individual things.
Well, we have a few minutes left. I'd like to get questions from the audience. Sil, you have a...
Yeah, Sil, we need to hear from
all right.
Sil and Vicky Schieber there. Yeah, our main witnesses here to the gospel today.
Sister Helen, when you got into this business, I think there were 9 states that didn't use the death penalty. Today, there's 22 or 23. There's 3 more that are in moratorium, but just take the ones that have eliminated the use of the death penalty. As they move from using the death penalty to eliminating the death penalty, has there been a decrease in the percentage of murders that have been tried as first-degree murders? And have there been many more of these people charged with first-degree murder who have gotten off because the death penalty no longer
What
existed?
do you mean by getting off? Going to life in prison?
We're found not guilty because of elimination.
So what exactly is your question, sir?
Well, the question is, as you move from having a death penalty
Right,
to not having a death penalty,
right.
does it affect the rate at which people are charged with murder and found guilty?
Has the law gotten more lenient?
Well, I don't know what that means.
No.
I really don't know.
I don't think the actual verdicts that people are found guilty of first degree murder has declined because they no longer have the bargaining power
I would think that's true, but I don't
change
really-
in the.
I don't really have any statistics on that.
Okay,
But
well,
it's good.
we've watched the process
You
and
know,
the murder prosecutions continue and the guilty verdicts continue. The ability to negotiate, whether or not negotiate over this death penalty
yeah.
doesn't seem to
Well,
change
that's an important
the
thing.
ultimate effect of the law, except
Okay.
you're not killing people.
That's great. You know, one thing we do know is the track record of the states that use the death penalty the most generally have much more violence in them than states that don't have the death penalty. And if you notice, most of the nation now is shutting it down. Where are the pockets where it's still going on? It's all ex-slave states. It's all Louisiana, Alabama, Florida, Texas. Look at them. And within the pockets of the states, you have pockets of prosecutors that are going for it every chance they get. And then you have these changes. So we just got this governor elected who says he's going to empty out death row. And so we're going at it again. It's a second wave of executions going on in this country right now.
Any other questions?
You touched on a really strong point that a lot of this death penalty that we're seeing is tied to anti-Blackness, especially in America. How do we remedy that when it's so ingrained in our history and our culture right now?
Education, education, education. I mean, young people need to understand how racism plays a role. And right now in the present administration, as they're doing away, we don't want all this discussion of diversity and equality and all. We don't want all that going on. And they're trying to have a direct hand in education. Education's everything. And then experiences where you get out of always just being with people just like you. And you're in there in a group of people, you know, with people of different races and people different backgrounds. It's so broadening. You know, it's the real educational process of being an American. So how can we build in more experiences where we get to be in the presence of people, not like us, and do prison visits? Some of you go to see the people in prison, visit with them. It's nothing like looking into the eyes of a human being. I mean, I'm looking into the eyes of Dean Cole. He's a nice guy, right? I mean, now I'm picturing looking into his eyes and he's behind bars because he got drunk one night and he had a gun and he went in to rob somebody and now he's behind bars. And I'm looking into those eyes. One is a human being who got to be the dean of a law school, and another is a human being which in a moment, whole life changed because he did a crazy, reckless, terrible act. And now he's behind prison bars. So especially those of us who are privileged, we're the ones that have to take the steps to get out of our little comfort circles and go into the places. Millard Farmer, who was one of the first people that worked on Pat Saunier's case, he ran team defense in Atlanta. He was a lawyer and he came from a wealthy family. He's very George. I'm going to help you. I'm going to help you, says. That's the way he talked. And I said, how'd you get involved, Millard, with these people on death row and these? And they're all poor people, of course. He said, we had a block in law school called poverty law. And it was the first time in my privileged life I was ever in the company of people who didn't have any of my advantages. And I began to see how they lived and how they struggled. And it gave me a heart for this work.
Any other questions? Kevin?
disagree with us and see the issue differently, how do we bring them and make them be proximate to this issue when they're predisposed to not have sympathy for
Yeah.
the people who have committed these crimes? I mean, I know there's the idea of public executions. That doesn't seem,
No.
super realistic at this time. So how do we help them be proximate and see the inherent dignity in these people who have committed these crimes?
Yeah. You're having a conversation with somebody, and they are all gung-ho for the death penalty. Where do you go with that conversation? Don't expect that in a short conversation, you're going to turn people around 180 degrees. But if you're listening to them, and as they're expressing things, you repeat. This is the one communications workshop I ever went to in my whole life. I learned something really important. And you know what it is? When someone expresses something, express back to them. Because what we're doing in our heads is thinking what we're going to say to counter it. As soon as they finish, they take a breath instead. So what I hear you saying is that this is going to be a way to deter crime. What could be worse than losing your own life? And you repeat back to them whatever argument they're giving you so they know you've listened. And then you invite them further into a conversation. Listen, I read this really good. Would you be willing to read this article and then we can talk again? Invite them to go deeper. And when you're reading, see, you're meditating, you're not debating. That's why I didn't know a book could be powerful. Because I come from the South, we talk to each other. I mean, you can have boiled crawfish out on the back lawn for 3.5 hours. If you want to know how to tell stories and stuff, I mean, we talk. So I thought of a book as a passive thing. Poor thing had to just sit on the shelf with all those other books, people coming in. How are you going to get people to go into that? But you invite them to go deeper and have some articles that you had, that are ready. Or invite them to read a book. But that's a big investment. Articles usually. And let's talk about this again. So you're investing in the conversation. It's not a short thing. And so they see you're serious and you're respecting what they say.
Question? You're getting a workout.
Yeah, well, got you moving, Ann.
Thank you, Sister Prejean. I have been reflecting on, I think, the strength of a lot of your arguments that rely on our Catholic faith, things like the inviolable human dignity of each person, and understanding that there is room for change, and to try to play God and say there's no room for change. And I'm wondering if you are speaking to someone who doesn't have any sort of religious foundation, what the most promising, secular arguments are that you've found, perhaps in conversations with others or just in your own judgment of those types of arguments, ones that don't, make any claims to any shared religious understanding. Thank you.
The Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Pope John the 23rd pointed to it as the beacon of the future. So this is human beings, human rights. It doesn't use the argument explicitly of religious faith. And what is Article 3 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? Which Eleanor Roosevelt had a big hand in forming that. It was right after World War II, where we had seen the destruction of human life in such quantities of people killed. Article 3, simply by being a human person, we have an inalienable right to life, which means life can't be alienated from us, which means governments can't be given the power to give human rights for good behavior or take it away for bad behavior, not in their purview. That's in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And that's what we have to share with people. The other one is no one should be subjected to cruel and degrading punishments. When Pope John Paul in St. Louis in 1999, in the first public statement we have of the Pope against the death penalty, said, the death penalty is cruel and it's unnecessary because we can keep people safe. How do we keep society safe is the question, the big question. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now, it took 1,500 years of church dialogue, Catholic dialogue, to come to the point where we're on an even keel now with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. No exceptions. No matter how grievous a crime, governments can't be entrusted with this right. And so now the Catholic Church in 2018, when we changed the Catholic Catechism, but it's there in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. No one, simply by being a human person. Now in faith, we know human beings are made in the image and likeness of God. What does that mean? And as history evolves, and as we evolve in our standards of decency and our understanding of human life, then we grow with it. And so I've been delighted to see my Catholic Church grow and develop. This is what's behind the synods. They got 10 people sitting around a table at these synodal, God, that's a terrible word. I hope we can get another word, just kind of a people word. But we're doing a synodal thing here. But 10 people sitting around a table, and you can have a teenager next to a bishop, and people are sharing their experiences. That's how God works in us, is through our experience. So you can have a teenager, 10 minutes, then the bishop. Okay, bishop, you're 10 minutes up. Go to the next person. Everybody listening to each other. And that's what's behind this. And we keep doing this. It's called which we need to help our courts get eventually, is evolving standards of decency. You got this originalism thing that Justice Scalia was a big proponent of. It's out there. We got to get into the mindset of the framers. What did they have in mind when they wrote the Constitution? When was that? Okay. And you actually had someone like Justice Scalia, who, when they were going to decide Atkins, that mentally challenged people cannot be executed, he looked up in the 18th century dictionary what the definition of idiot was. And that's what he brought to that discussion. We evolve, we change, we have psychology, we have psychiatry. We know now that juveniles' brains are not developed until in their 20s. And so then we made the decision in Simmons that you can't kill people younger than 18. We were one of the last countries in the world to do that. So it makes a big difference of who is the person who has committed this crime and what are the mitigating circumstances in their life. Culpability is never about straight, did you do it or not? But wait, this was a kid. What happened to this kid? And you always have to look at the human person. So Universal Declaration of Human Rights is the road we can all go down. And I got to tell you, most of the people I'm talking to are not, I mean, Catholic audiences like you, yeah. But you know, our Catholic faith, because of the Holy Spirit stirring in our heart, and that fire thing I was telling you about, we move, we change. And it's always open to us to change too.
All right, we've got one final question.
Make it a good one.
Sister Helen, I think I, for one, believe you, and I think others here do too. You've testified to the dignity of human beings and to a consistent ethics of life response. And I'd like to invite you to extend it in two more directions, if you care to. One is looking at the past. Anderson D. Butler is a South Bend native who was killed after a 22-minute jury deliberation after the Second World War as part of the whole legal lynching world. How about exoneration as an expression of human dignity? And looking to the future, how about, and maybe a little harder question to ask in these days, how about our self-defense and our right to defend ourselves against people who might do us harm? Russia exercised that right against the Ukrainians. Perhaps Israel exercised it against the Palestinians and certainly Hamas. And perhaps we're getting ready to exercise it against the people in Iran and maybe in Yemen as well.
Okay, now you're getting into the war thing. We could be here 3 days on that.
I just comment on a consistent life ethic in any of those places, sister.
No, okay.
Thank you.
Consistent life ethic. First of all, look at our defense budget. Look at the billions that go into the defense budget because we have to protect ourselves against our enemies. Who are our enemies? Our real enemies. Are immigrants our enemies? Who are they? We always have to watch the way that goes, and you start demonizing people, which makes people afraid So we got to build up our defense. Yes, we have a right to defense, but who are our enemies? And who have we been enemy to? You got to look at that. Look at what we did in Iraq. You got to look at what we have done in countries and that part of prejudice too against Muslim people and the whole bit. So there's plenty soul searching to do around that. The principle is right. Yeah, we have a right to self-defense. But, you know, Martin Luther King said, look at your budget. Look at how many of our tax dollars are going into, and look at the inflated things in the defense budget. That's a moral document. We got people who are hungry in this country. We have people who are living in poverty in this country. We have people who can't afford health care in this country. Was John Locke right that the only role of government was for defense and private property? Or does a government have a role in the welfare of the people and sharing those tax dollars so that people who are in real need have a chance? So that's a big topic, I know that. But in general, we just want to be really wary when we talk about the huge investment of defense, and look how we begin to talk about the enemy. And once you can state that somebody's your enemy, look at the demeaning language that starts coming in there. I mean, it happens in every war. But we need to be, and that's where our spiritual powers, that guy, one of my most comforting lines from the scriptures is when Jesus was about to leave, it's at the Last Supper. And he said, my spirit is going to be in your hearts. And the spirit will, two things, teach you everything you need to know, and then help you to remember. This is really good as you're getting older. Help you to remember and remind you of the important things that I have said to you. Reminds us and teaches us. And that's part of our dignity. We are made in the image and likeness of God, which means we have an infinite capacity to know truth and to love and to widen our love more and more with God's Spirit in our hearts. Isn't that wonderful to know and to live out of?
Well, sister, since you're quoting scripture, Jesus commands us in Matthew 25 to see his face in the face of everyone we encounter, and we can't help but to see Christ in you. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. Well, I'm glad you're here. Well, good work, good work.